The mysterious signal. In the vast emptiness of space, there was only silence. For years, the Zorithian Empire had ruled the galaxy with unmatched strength. Their fleet, large and powerful, patrolled the stars, keeping any potential threats at bay. They had conquered countless worlds, each more advanced than the last, and had little to fear from the smaller, weaker species they encountered. But today, something was different. A strange signal had been picked up by one of their patrol ships. It was faint at first, barely more than a whisper in the void. The officer on duty, a young Zorithian named Harl, had thought it was just another glitch in the system. However, as he watched the readings carefully, his heart began to race. The signal wasn't a random anomaly. It was something purposeful. "Sir," Tarl's voice trembled over the comms. "I'm detecting an unusual signal coming from Sector 467. It's unlike anything we've seen before." The Zorithian commander, Arvok, turned his head slowly, his sharp eyes narrowing in suspicion. He had heard of humans, a species thought to be weak and primitive, barely able to defend themselves from outside threats. Why would they be sending a signal into the depths of space? "Can you trace its origin?" Arvok asked, his voice low and dangerous. Tarl worked quickly, his claws dancing over the controls. "I'm trying, Commander, but it's faint and fragmented. It's coming from the edge of our known space, but the signal strength is increasing. It's becoming stronger." Arvok's eyes flickered with curiosity, but also a hint of annoyance. The Zorithians had no time for games. If this was some human trick, it would be dealt with swiftly. They had better things to do than chase after ghosts in the galaxy. But as the seconds ticked by, the signal grew louder, and its origin became clearer. "It's human," Tarl said, almost in disbelief. "It's a human signal." Arvok leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Humans. Their technology was basic, far behind the Zorithians in every way. What could they possibly want with a signal like this? For years, the Zorithians had dismissed humanity as nothing more than an afterthought. Their primitive ships, their basic weapons, none of it had ever posed a real threat. A moment of silence passed before Arvok gave his orders. "Send a fleet to Sector 467. Investigate. But be ready. If this is a trap, we'll destroy them on sight." The order was swift, and within minutes, a small fleet of Zorithian ships was dispatched, their engines humming with the power of the Empire's might. They cruised through space at incredible speeds, their weapons primed and their shields raised. The thought of humans sending out a distress signal, or worse, an invitation to attack, was laughable. Yet something about this felt different. As they neared the source of the signal, a strange unease began to fill the air. The signal's frequency had shifted, becoming more distinct, almost as if it were alive. It wasn't simply a warning. It was a message, a challenge. The fleet's sensors could pick up no other ships in the area, yet the signal continued, louder and more urgent. Arvok's second-in-command, a battle-hardened Zorithian named Vel, frowned as she scanned the data. "It's not a distress call. It's a warning." "A warning?" Arvok repeated, his voice colder. "What could humans possibly warn us about?" As if on cue, the signal suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell over the fleet, but before anyone could speak, a burst of static flooded the comms, followed by a clear, crisp voice. "Warning," the voice echoed through the speakers. "Human warship detected. Stay clear. Danger is imminent." The Zorithians froze. A human warship. Impossible. The voice was calm, almost casual, as though it were telling them to avoid a simple inconvenience. But the words sent a chill down their spines. The idea of a human warship was laughable, yet here it was, being broadcasted across the stars. The fleet commander, Arvok, stood still, his face rigid. "What is this madness?" He muttered under his breath. "A human warship, in our space? Impossible." Vel's claws clicked nervously against the control panel. The humans must be desperate. Maybe this is some kind of bluff, a last-ditch effort to be taken seriously. I suggest we ignore it. Arvok considered the situation carefully. If it was a bluff, they could easily destroy the human ship. But what if it wasn't? What if humanity had somehow managed to build something far beyond their capabilities? The thought was absurd, but the nagging feeling in the back of his mind told him otherwise. "Prepare the fleet," Arvok ordered. "We will go to Sector 467. If this human warship is real, we will find it. And if they pose a threat, we will end it." The Zorithian ships began to move toward the coordinates of the signal. The vast expanse of space stretched out before them, empty and cold. But within that cold silence, something was stirring. The Zorithians, once so sure of their dominance, were about to encounter something they couldn't yet comprehend. The human warship, whatever it was coming, and it was about to change everything. The Zorithian fleet moved through the cold expanse of space, their engines humming in synchronized harmony. Commander Arvok stood in the center of the command deck, his piercing eyes focused on the vast void ahead. His mind raced with thoughts of the mysterious human signal, the strange warning, and what it all meant. His warriors, battle-hardened and ready for anything, stood in silence, awaiting orders. As the fleet advanced deeper into Sector 467, the signal grew stronger, almost overwhelming in its intensity. It was no longer a faint whisper. Now, it was a clear, steady pulse, like the beat of a drum. It seemed to call out to them, beckoning them forward, but also warning them. Something was wrong. Tarl, the young officer from the previous day, was now at his station, his claws shaking as he worked the control panel. "Commander Arvok." Tarl's voice wavered. "I'm picking up something. Something huge. It's coming from right ahead of us." Arvok turned sharply, his mind already anticipating the worst. "What do you mean by huge, officer?" Tarl swallowed nervously. I'm not sure. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's massive, Commander. The readings are off the charts." Arvok clenched his fists. For a moment, he was silent, absorbing the weight of the situation. His fleet had destroyed countless enemies, reduced entire civilizations to rubble. But this was different. The humans had been laughed off as insignificant. Yet now, they seemed to be testing the very limits of his confidence. "We will proceed cautiously," Arvok said, his voice calm, but with an edge of authority. "Set a course. We'll see this ship for ourselves." The fleet closed in, and the strange signal grew louder and more intense. The tension among the crew was palpable. Even the Zorithian warriors, normally so fearless, could not ignore the odd sense of dread creeping into their hearts. They had faced countless battles, fought wars that spanned light years, but the feeling of something unknown stirred unease among them. Then, without warning, it appeared. It wasn't like any ship they had seen before. There was no grand, majestic design like the Zorithian warships or the elegant engineering of their allies. This was raw, brutal. The human ship was enormous, its dark, jagged silhouette cutting through the stars like a predator on the hunt. It seemed to have grown organically, like it had been forged in the fires of war itself. The ship's outer shell was a patchwork of rough metal, thick with scars from countless battles. Its engines glowed with an unnatural, violent red hue, and strange energy pulses radiated from its core. It's not like any ship we've seen," Vel, Arvok's second-in-command, said, her voice hushed in disbelief. "What is that?" Arvok narrowed his eyes. "It doesn't matter what it looks like. We'll destroy it just like we've destroyed everything else that's dared to challenge us. Prepare the weapons." But as he gave the command, something else happened. The human ship didn't move. It remained stationary, its lights flickering ominously, but it made no attempt to flee or engage. It was almost as if it were waiting for them. Tarl's voice rang out again. "Commander, I'm getting a message from the ship. It's coming through on all channels. You need to hear this. Arvok's curiosity got the better of him. Play it. A crackling sound filled the deck, followed by the same voice they had heard before, the voice that had warned them. Warning, the voice echoed, calm and measured. Human warship detected. You are in violation of human space. Leave immediately, or face the consequences. For a moment, the Zorithian crew was stunned into silence. The voice was cool, devoid of fear, as though it spoke to a species that had no need to be intimidated. It was an arrogance unlike anything they had encountered. Who did these humans think they were? Face the consequences. Arvok scoffed, his lip curling into a sneer. How dare they? They have no idea who they are dealing with. Vel glanced at him, her expression serious. Commander, this ship, it's not acting like a typical human vessel. It doesn't fear us. Arvok's temper flared. He had seen fear before, especially from species that were foolish enough to challenge the Zorithians. But this was different. The humans, with their primitive technology, had no right to be so confident. Prepare to fire, Arvok commanded. We'll show them the price of their arrogance. As his fleet readied its weapons, Tarl's voice interrupted once again, filled with urgency. Commander, you need to see this. With a sharp command, the main screen flashed to life, revealing a real-time image of the human warship. And then it happened, something that no one had expected. The ship's hull shifted, opening like the maw of a beast. A brilliant beam of light, brighter than any weapon the Zorithians had ever seen, erupted from the ship's core. It shot through the darkness of space, fast and unrelenting, aimed directly at the Zorithian fleet. For a split second, everything froze. The beam tore through space like a hammer of judgment, and Arvok's heart skipped a beat. There was no way that beam could exist. No race, not even the Zorithians, had technology capable of something so powerful. But there it was. The beam slammed into one of the Zorithian ships, obliterating it in a single strike. The destruction was instantaneous, the ship disintegrating into a cloud of fiery debris. The Zorithians stared in shock, frozen in disbelief. The humans weren't just threatening them. They were ready to fight, and they were doing it with a power the Zorithians could not understand. The voice on the comms crackled again, eerily calm. Warning, leave now, or you will face more consequences. And for the first time, Commander Arvok wasn't sure if he could win this fight. The Zorithian fleet reeled from the shockwave of destruction. A single blast from the human warship had wiped out one of their strongest ships, and the fleet had barely recovered when they saw what the humans were capable of. For the first time, the invincible Zorithians were caught off guard. Arvok's mind raced, trying to grasp the implications of what had just happened. How could this be? Arvok muttered, his eyes still fixed on the screen. He couldn't believe his own eyes. A single blast from the human ship had torn through one of their most powerful warships like paper. It had been destroyed so quickly that there was no time to react. Commander, Vel's voice cut through the silence. We need to think this through. The human ship. It's not just powerful, it's precise. This isn't some random attack. It's calculating. This weapon they've unleashed, it's not something we've seen before. Arvok clenched his fists. His pride was wounded, but he couldn't afford to show weakness now. Prepare the fleet for immediate retaliation, he ordered sharply. We will crush them. I will not be mocked by a race of humans. But even as he said the words, doubts gnawed at the edge of his confidence. The human warship hadn't even moved. It had just stood still, as if daring them to make a move, knowing full well it held the upper hand. Tarl, who had been silent until now, spoke with hesitation. Commander, there's something else. The human ship, it's not just a ship, it's a force of nature. I'm seeing energy readings I can't explain. The sheer power, it's beyond our weapons. Arvok's gaze flicked to the officer. What do you mean? Tarl pointed at the screen. I'm seeing waves of energy, ripples in space itself. It's like the human ship is bending the very fabric of space to its will. I've never seen anything like it. A cold sweat broke out across Arvok's brow. Space-bending technology. That was the stuff of legends, of stories told to frighten young warriors. Yet here, in front of him, it seemed to be real. And he knew that if this ship had such power, it could mean the end of everything he had worked for. "We're not prepared for this," Vel said, her voice tight with concern. "Their ship is not just strong, it's designed for total destruction. We're not dealing with a primitive species anymore. These humans are on another level." Arvok gritted his teeth, refusing to show fear. "What do you suggest then? We run and hide?" Vel's voice softened. "We need to regroup. If we can't match their power directly, we have to outsmart them. This isn't just a battle of strength, it's a battle of tactics. We'll need to find a weakness." Arvok hesitated. For the first time in his life, he was unsure, but he couldn't back down now. Not when the entire fleet depended on him. "All right," he said, a cold edge in his voice. "We'll change our approach. We'll wait for the humans to make their move, and we'll strike when they least expect it. But don't get too comfortable. We'll strike hard, and we'll strike fast." He turned to face his officers. "This warship is unlike anything we've ever faced. But we are Zorithians, and we will not be beaten by some primitive ship. We will find a way to destroy it." As he gave the orders, the fleet began to shift, slowly pulling into formation. Their engines hummed with a deep, resonating power as they adjusted their positions. The human warship loomed before them, a dark, imposing shadow in the stars. It remained perfectly still, almost as though it were waiting for them to make the next move. And in that stillness, Arvok felt something he had never felt before: doubt. Hours passed, and the Zorithian fleet waited, still and tense. The silence in the command deck was deafening. Even the warriors, normally so calm under pressure, were restless. They had faced countless enemies in their time, but none had made them feel this way. Suddenly, Tarl's voice rang out across the deck, sharp with alarm. "Commander, they're powering up again. That same weapon, it's charging." Arvok's heart skipped a beat. Without warning, the human ship fired again, its weapons lighting up the darkness of space like a burst of fiery stars. The beam shot forward, faster than the Zorithian ships could react. This time, however, the fleet was ready. As the beam approached, the Zorithians activated their shields, a protective energy field enveloping their ships. The beam struck. The shields vibrated under the impact, and for a moment, it looked like the Zorithian ships would be torn apart. But the shields held. The energy from the human weapon rippled off the shield like a wave crashing against a rock. The force of the blast pushed the Zorithian ships back, but they remained intact. The Zorithians had survived, just barely. "Report," Arvok barked. Tarl's voice trembled. "The shield took most of the impact, but it's weakening. The energy levels are unstable. We can't take another hit like that." Arvok clenched his teeth. "Retreat, now. We need distance. We need time to regroup." But even as he gave the order, he knew it was already too late. The human ship was relentless. It wasn't going to give them any time to breathe. This wasn't just a battle. It was a hunt, and they were the prey. The Zorithian fleet began to pull back, but the human warship followed, its engines burning with a terrifying intensity. The chase had begun, and it was only a matter of time before the humans made their next move. The Zorithian fleet retreated through the vast expanse of space, their ships racing to put distance between them and the human warship that had just nearly decimated them. It was like running from a storm you couldn't outrun, the feeling of impending doom gnawing at their minds. The vastness of space seemed like an enemy in itself now, stretching out in all directions as the Zorithian ships scrambled to find safety. The hum of engines filled the air in the command deck, but it was a tense, uneasy sound. No one spoke for a long while, not until Arvok, their commander, spoke. "We need to buy time," Arvok said, his voice low but firm. "We need to regroup and analyze their attack. We cannot afford another mistake." Vel, his most trusted officer, was at the control panel. Her hands moved quickly, pressing buttons and scanning through their systems. "Commander, their weapons, they're unlike anything we've faced before. We can't just rely on shields to protect us. We'll need more than just our firepower to win this fight." Arvok's jaw tightened. He knew that Vel was right. Their usual tactics, powerful weapons and overwhelming force, wouldn't work this time. The humans had proven that their technology was far more advanced, and their strategy was anything but predictable. Suddenly, the ship's sensors pinged, drawing everyone's attention to the screen. The human warship was no longer following them directly. Instead, it had slowed, its engines now glowing a soft blue, as if it were waiting for the Zorithians to make the next move. A chilling silence fell across the room. Was this some kind of trap, or were the humans simply giving them time to rethink their strategy? "We're running out of time," Tarl, the youngest officer, said nervously, looking at the readouts. "Their ship is still intact. We can't wait forever." Arvok paced across the room, his mind racing. There had to be something they could do. They couldn't just flee. They were the Zorithians, conquerors, warriors, and they would not be the ones to bow down to a human ship. "We won't run," Arvok growled, turning to face his officers. "We'll fight, but this time, we do it smarter. We'll split up. We'll confuse them. We've done this before with our enemies. We'll make them chase us, and when they think they've won, we'll strike." Vel nodded but added cautiously, "But remember, Commander, this human ship, it's not just a warship, it's a weapon. And I don't know if we're prepared for what's coming next." Arvok took a deep breath, looking at the shimmering stars outside. He could feel the weight of their situation settling on his shoulders. They were running out of options, and the Zorithian fleet, once so proud, was now fighting to survive. They had underestimated the human ship, and now they were paying the price. Minutes passed in agonizing silence. The fleet continued to drift through space, each ship readying itself for the next move. The crew had every expectation that the human warship would soon make its move, and it was clear they wouldn't get another chance to outthink them. Finally, the human ship made its move. The massive warship surged forward, its engines flaring to life as it rocketed toward the Zorithian fleet. This wasn't a cautious advance anymore. It was a hunt. The humans were closing in, and they were making it clear they wouldn't back down until they had their prey. "They're coming," Tarl shouted, fear creeping into his voice. "Full speed ahead, Commander." "Not yet," Arvok replied, his eyes narrowing. "Hold your course. Wait for my signal." The Zorithian ships scattered, heading in different directions to confuse the human ship. But even as they tried to split up, Arvok could see the human warship adjust its course, tracking every movement of the fleet with frightening precision. The human ship wasn't reacting, it was calculating. Every move the Zorithians made, the humans countered, and it became clear that their strategy wasn't just based on speed or brute force. Suddenly, a burst of energy flared from the human warship. A powerful beam, brighter than 1,000 suns, shot out and tore through the space between the Zorithian ships. Arvok's eyes widened as the beam locked onto the ship of one of his officers. It hit hard, and the ship exploded in a brilliant flash of light. "No," Arvok shouted, gripping the control panel. "We can't let them do this to us." Vel's voice was urgent. "We have to counterattack, Commander. Now. We don't have the luxury of time." "Prepare to fire," Arvok commanded, though doubt had already begun to creep into his voice. The Zorithians fired everything they had, but it was clear that their weapons had no impact on the human ship's armor. The blast seemed to barely touch it, as though the warship was wrapped in an invisible shield. The Zorithians regrouped, but the human ship was relentless. It chased them, its weapon systems locking onto each Zorithian vessel one by one. And each time, The humans fired without hesitation, obliterating any ship that stood in their path. The Zorithians had underestimated the humans, and now they were paying the price. Their proud fleet was being picked off one by one, and the commander knew that time was running out. The human warship was too powerful. There had to be a way to stop it, but with each passing second, the Zorithians seemed closer to defeat. The Zorithian fleet was in disarray, ships scattered across the vast emptiness of space like broken pieces of a shattered mirror. Arvok, the Zorithian commander, stood at the control panel, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge. His officers were silent, their faces grim. The human warship had decimated their ranks with terrifying ease, and the few remaining ships were struggling to regroup. The Zorithians had underestimated the power of humanity's technology, and now they were paying the price. Arvok's mind raced. They couldn't just run. The humans had made it clear that they would not let the Zorithians escape. Every ship that tried to flee was destroyed in an instant, torn apart by the human warship's devastating weaponry. But there had to be something, some way to fight back. "We need a plan," Arvok muttered, more to himself than to anyone else. "We cannot keep fleeing. The human ship is too fast, too powerful. We have to think differently." Vel, his most trusted officer, was at the communications panel. She turned to him with a look of determination. "Commander, I have an idea. It might be our last chance, but if we act quickly, we might have a chance to turn the tables." Arvok raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Vel didn't hesitate. "We've been trying to outrun them, trying to attack head-on. But we're not thinking like the humans. We need to use their own strategy against them. They rely on overwhelming firepower, but they've shown us one weakness. They underestimate speed and unpredictability." Arvok frowned. "So, you want us to what? Outrace them?" "No," Vel said, shaking her head. "We need to use our smallest ships to create chaos. We'll split the remaining fleet into small, fast-moving groups. We'll create multiple targets, confuse them, and draw their fire. Once we force them to waste their energy, we'll strike with the largest ships, hard and fast, before they can retaliate." Arvok thought for a moment. It was risky, but it was also the only option they had left. The human warship was relentless, and there was no escaping it. They had to take the fight to the humans, with everything they had. "Prepare the fleet," Arvok said, his voice cold and commanding. "We fight, not as individuals, but as a swarm." Vel nodded and quickly got to work. The officers around her scrambled, inputting the necessary commands to initiate the new plan. The Zorithian ships, once organized into large, coordinated groups, now began to break apart into smaller clusters. Each small group of ships moved independently, following erratic flight paths designed to confuse and overwhelm the human warship's sensors. From the command deck, Arvok watched as his fleet scattered. The Zorithians had always prided themselves on their ability to fight as a unified force, but now they had no choice but to divide their strength. The smaller ships would be the bait, darting and weaving through space, drawing the human ship's fire. The larger, more powerful ships would wait, hidden among the stars, ready to strike when the time was right. The human warship was still in pursuit, its massive engines glowing as it closed in on the scattered Zorithian fleet. From the screen, it looked like a predator hunting its prey, slowly but steadily gaining on its targets. Arvok clenched his fists. "We've got one shot at this," he said, his voice tight with anticipation. "Vel, make sure the larger ships are ready to engage when I give the signal." Vel's face was hard, her gaze unflinching. "Understood." The Zorithian fleet continued to scatter, moving at top speed in every direction. But it wasn't enough to escape the human warship's detection. Slowly, one by one, the smaller ships began to fall. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of space as the human warship fired with deadly precision. Arvok's heart sank with each lost ship, but he knew they were sacrificing themselves for the greater good. They had to keep the humans occupied. As the smaller ships created chaos, the larger ships remained hidden, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was a delicate balance. If they waited too long, they would lose the opportunity. But if they attacked too soon, they would be destroyed before they could inflict any real damage. Then, just as the human warships seemed to be closing in on the last of the small ships, Arvok saw it. A small opening. The human warship had focused all of its fire on the decoy ships, leaving the larger Zorithian vessels temporarily undetected. It was now or never. Now, Arvok shouted, his voice booming through the control deck. Strike! The Zorithian ships, hidden in the shadows, surged forward. The engines roared to life as they tore across space, each ship launching a barrage of missiles and energy blasts. The human warship tried to react, but it was too late. The Zorithians had closed the distance, and their firepower was overwhelming. The first volley of missiles slammed into the human warship's shields, sending shockwaves through the structure. The ship's weapons fired back, but the Zorithians had already scattered, making it nearly impossible to target them all at once. For the first time, the human warship seemed vulnerable. Arvok's heart raced. Could this be the turning point? Would they finally break the human ship's defenses? The Zorithian ships pressed on, firing relentlessly. But as the seconds ticked by, something began to change. The human warship's shields flickered, then flared back to full strength. It was repairing itself. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were adapting. No, Arvok shouted. We have to finish this now. But it was clear, this battle wasn't over. The human warship was far from defeated, and if the Zorithians didn't act quickly, they would lose their last chance. The true test had only just begun. The battlefield in space was a chaotic dance of death. Explosions and flashes of energy lit up the darkness. But there was something different now. The human warship had taken hits, and its shields were flickering, showing signs of wear. The Zorithian fleet, though reduced in number, was still attacking fiercely, their missiles and energy blasts hammering against the human defenses. But there was an eerie calm within the human warship. As Zorithian missiles streaked toward them, the warship's hull seemed to absorb the impact without hesitation. The Zorithian commander, Arvok, watched in disbelief as the human ship continued its slow, methodical response, its massive cannons turning toward the Zorithians with terrifying precision. The human warship's adaptive systems had kicked in, and it was regenerating its shields faster than any of the Zorithians had anticipated. As the Zorithian ships broke formation, attempting to avoid the human fire, the warship unleashed a devastating barrage of its own. A series of powerful energy blasts pierced through space, obliterating multiple Zorithian ships in seconds. Arvok watched helplessly as his fleet began to crumble. The smaller ships, which had once been a source of hope, were being picked off one by the relentless barrage from the human warship. The larger ships were still holding back, waiting for an opening, but it was becoming clear that their chances were slipping away. Vel, standing beside Arvok, was visibly shaken. Commander, we can't keep this up. They're too strong. We've underestimated them. Arvok clenched his fists. I know, but we can't give up now. We need tow. Before he could finish, a loud warning beep echoed through the control room. A massive burst of energy erupted from the human warship, and Arvok's heart sank as he saw the energy reading spike. The human ship had found a way to adapt even faster. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, Arvok shouted, but the panic was setting in. It was too late. The human warship had already launched a new kind of attack. The Zorithian ships scattered, but they were not fast enough. The human warship's cannons charged up, and a thick beam of searing energy shot out, hitting the first Zorithian ship in its path. The ship's shields were no match for the power behind the beam. It disintegrated in an instant, leaving behind only debris floating in the void. The Zorithians tried to retaliate, but it was like throwing stones at a wall. Their weapons barely scratched the surface of the human warship's shields. For the first time, The Zorithians realized just how much they had underestimated humanity. The human ship wasn't just powerful, it was unbreakable. As Arvok watched, a cold dread gripped him. He had never encountered a force like this. The humans had turned the tide with a few simple moves, and now his fleet was on the brink of destruction. In the midst of the chaos, a new message appeared on the communication screen. It was a direct transmission from the human warship. "This is your final warning." The voice came through, steady and calm. "Cease your attack immediately or face the consequences. This is your last chance." Arvok's eyes narrowed. The arrogance of the humans was staggering. They had already crippled his fleet, and now they were giving him an ultimatum. But something in the tone of the message struck him. There was no fear, no anger, just cold, calculating determination. The human warship had no intention of backing down. It would destroy them if they didn't retreat. Vel turned to Arvok, her voice tight with desperation. "Commander, we need to fall back. We've lost." Arvok stood motionless, staring at the screen. The remnants of his fleet were scattered. A few ships already in retreat, others left behind as debris. He had led them into this battle, and now they were on the verge of annihilation. But then something inside him snapped. He could not, would not, surrender to these humans. They had mocked the Zorithians, dismissed them as insignificant, and now they were paying the price. He would not let them win. "No," Arvok said through gritted teeth. "We fight to the end. Prepare for a final attack. We're not retreating." The Zorithian fleet was down to a handful of ships, and the remaining forces prepared for one last push. But as Arvok issued his orders, he knew it was hopeless. The human warship had already proven its dominance, and any further resistance would be futile. The Zorithian ships surged forward, hoping to take the humans by surprise. But the human warship was ready. With a sudden, blinding flash, it launched a devastating counterattack. The Zorithian ships, too slow to react, were obliterated in seconds. The human warship's overwhelming power tore through their ranks, and the few remaining ships turned and fled, unable to withstand the onslaught. In the end, the Zorithians were defeated, their fleet shattered beyond recognition. Arvok, with his ship's final moments ticking away, realized that the humans had done what no other race could. They had crushed the Zorithians without breaking a sweat. The message from the human warship came through once more. "You are lucky to live. The next time we meet, there will be no mercy." The screen went black. The silence after the battle was deafening. The remnants of the Zorithian fleet drifted in space, a graveyard of burning wrecks and shattered ships. In the distance, the human warship hovered like an unshakable mountain, its shields still intact, its cannons silent for now. It had been a swift, decisive victory, one that left the Zorithians reeling in shock and disbelief. On the Zorithian command ship, Arvok stood at the bridge, his heart heavy. His once proud fleet had been destroyed in a matter of hours. The Zorithians had never faced an enemy like this, an enemy whose power and technology were far beyond anything they had ever encountered. It was clear now that humanity was a force to be reckoned with. The humans had not only defeated the Zorithians, they had humiliated them, breaking their morale in a way that could not be fixed with simple negotiations or diplomacy. Vel, standing beside Arvok, could feel the weight of their defeat. "Commander, what now?" she asked, her voice low. "We can't fight them again. Not after this." Arvok's mind raced. The defeat was overwhelming, but the words of the human captain echoed in his ears. "The next time we meet, there will be no mercy." He knew what that meant. Humanity was not just a new threat to the galaxy. They were a new power, and they wouldn't be content with just one victory. If the Zorithians wanted to survive, they needed to change. They needed to rethink their entire strategy. "We have no choice," Arvok muttered. "We have to prepare. The humans are coming, and we will need allies if we stand any chance of stopping them." Vel nodded slowly, understanding the gravity of his words. The galaxy would not remain quiet after today. Rumors of the human warships would spread like wildfire, and every faction, every species, would take notice. The Zorithians, once a dominant force in the galaxy, were now on the defensive. Meanwhile, aboard the human warship, the crew celebrated their victory in silence. There was no fanfare, no cheering. Instead, they carried out their duties with quiet efficiency. Captain Wallace stood in the command center, staring at the holographic map of the galaxy before him. The Zorithian fleet had been decimated, but there was more to the mission than just defeating one enemy. The humans had made their presence known to the galaxy, and that was only the beginning. Lieutenant Hall, standing beside the captain, looked up at him with a mix of admiration and curiosity. "What's next, sir? The Zorithians are gone. Do we pursue them further?" Wallace shook his head. "No, the Zorithians are finished for now. Our mission is to send a message to the rest of the galaxy. Humanity is here, and we're not going away." He paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "Prepare for the next phase of our operation. We'll be making contact with other factions soon. Let them know what happens when you underestimate humanity." Back on the Zorithian command ship, Arvok had already begun to make plans. His fleet was gone, but his will to survive was not. The Zorithians would rebuild, and they would adapt, but they would not do it alone. Arvok knew that the galaxy's balance of power had shifted. The humans had shown their strength, but they were not the only players in the galaxy. There were other empires, other species that could be convinced to join forces against the humans. The Zorithians would need allies. Fast. He turned to his communications officer. "Send out a message. We need to make contact with the Valgar, the T-Kai, and the Erosians. We must form an alliance." The officer nodded and quickly began transmitting the urgent plea for help. As the message was sent out into the void, Arvok could only hope that the other factions would hear it. He had no choice but to bet everything on the strength of an alliance. It was their only hope against the terrifying human warship that had decimated his fleet. In the coming days, the message from Arvok and the Zorithian High Command spread across the galaxy. The plea for help was answered by a few, but many factions remained hesitant. The humans, it seemed, were a growing force, a force that could not be ignored. But as the galaxy prepared for the next round of conflict, one thing was clear. The humans had shown the universe what they were capable of, and they weren't done yet. The human warship drifted through space, a silent reminder to everyone that there was no such thing as safety anymore. There were no more peaceful days in the galaxy. Humanity had come, and now, the universe had to reckon with the fact that they were not the weak, primitive species they once believed them to be. The next chapter in the galaxy's history had begun, and it was going to be a terrifying one for everyone.